It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is David Harrison of the Locked On Commanders podcast to tell you that US Cellular is introducing US Mode. It's kind of like airplane mode, but it's for people. It's a way to set up your phone so it doesn't get in the way of people really being with each other. Block distractions and make way for real connection. Give it a try. Visit US Cellular in-store or online, and they'll help you set up your phone for US Mode for free, even if you're not a customer. Built for superior 5G connection and real human connection. US Cellular, built for us. Find out more at uscellular.com/find us.
Oh, baby, we got a special one for you today, everybody, and thank you for joining us for the Wednesday episode of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. The NHL rumor mill and off-season news mill is starting to turn, and we got to break it all down for you, including a trade in the NHL. What does this Ivan Provorov news mean for the Columbus Blue Jackets? And, of course, a special guest looking at the New York Islanders. Let's get right to it.
You're Locked On Fantasy Hockey, your daily podcast on fantasy hockey. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everybody? And welcome back inside the lab to your source for fantasy hockey news. It's the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. I'm joined, as always, by my esteemed co-host, Mr. Steele Roden. It's your boy, Big Flip Livingstone, and thank you for making us your first listen every single day. We are going to continue to break down everything you need to know from the Stanley Cup on tomorrow's episode. But on today's episode, my friends, we're breaking down the NHL trade today between the Kings, Flyers, and Blue Jackets. But of course, we got to bring on Mr. Gil Martin of the Locked On Islanders to talk about this Islanders situation while we continue to break down every single team in the NHL this offseason. Steele, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Bird Dogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL, and when you enter promo code LockedOnNHL, they're going to throw in a free custom Bird Dogs Yeti-style tumbler with every single order. Steele, I got it all out of the way. I think I got it all covered today. That was a mouthful, but this is some really exciting news because now, we've been grinding it out. We've been taking a look at this Stanley Cup final night in and night out. There is some big news coming out of the NHL. The Philadelphia Flyers making some noise. Hit me with your take on this Provorov situation, and then we'll quickly dive into Carter Hart is going to be in another city very soon, Steele, and this is going to mean big things for that team and his fantasy value.
Yeah, Daniel Briere is not holding back this offseason. You don't typically see trades happen during the Stanley Cup Finals or during the postseason, but Briere doesn't care whatsoever. He needs to make a mark now, and he's making a few changes already. Obviously, the big one, the only one that's already happened, 3-team deal, Ivan Provorov to the Columbus Blue Jackets. Philadelphia gets in return a first-round pick from 2023. I think that's a 22nd overall pick in the first round, as well as a conditional 2024 second-round pick. So they get a couple of picks back for Provorov, and then including in the same deal, the 3-team deal, with the Los Angeles Kings included, 30% retained on Provorov. They get Kevin Connaughton and Hayden Hodgins, and then Philadelphia Flyers get Helgi Grains, a second-round pick, Cal Peterson, and Sean Walker. So,
interesting.
A decent goaltender who has struggled the last few years, but has proven that he can play in the NHL at times. Yep. And Sean Walker, a very decent defenseman from
serviceable.
The LA Kings. So they get picks, they get a couple of D-men in return, a goaltender. They ship Ivan Provorov, and Provorov is one of those guys that, consistently puts up 35 points a year. He gets 150 blocks, 60 to 70 hits, doesn't get a ton of shots on net, around 100 shots per year, but he's a serviceable defenseman if you need to fill your lineup roster with if the guy goes down to injury or you have a defenseman who's just not playing well. He's a guy that is interchangeable throughout the season. I'm not sure if he's a draftable guy, but he is serviceable throughout the year.
And the interesting thing is last year for him was a bit of an outlier. You mentioned the shots down to 115, but before that, 170, 150, 203. He does bring some peripherals. The points were down last year, but to me, this is a trade where, aside from Sean Walker and the prospects, with Provorov and Peterson, it's a case of guys who need a change of scenery. Yes. And I think potentially we might see both of these guys' value bounce back. Am I saying Cal Peterson going to the Philadelphia goalie graveyard is a guy that you want to grab? Maybe not, but he is going to get a look to be the guy in that cage steal. Provorov might get a bump in some value playing with a very offensive-minded team at times in Columbus. We know that they can score goals when they're healthy. A lot of little interesting things going on with the Columbus Blue Jackets, at least fantasy-wise, Steele, that we want to pay attention to. That Metro is still full of killers. I don't think I'm ready to write them in as a playoff bubble team. But Provorov's value, let's keep an eye on it. Peterson's value, let's keep an eye on it. But what it indicates to me, Steele, is Carter Hart might be on his way out. And I'm not the only one. We are not the only ones thinking that. We got David Pagnotta. We got guys across the league really indicating it, Steele. Carter Hart, 22 wins last year, 23 losses. More importantly, 907 save percentage and a 2.94 goals against. He proved last year that he can be much better. He proved that he can be that second-round draft pick that we thought was going to be pretty good fantasy option, Steele. And I think if he moves to the team that I keep hearing, the Edmonton Oilers, oh my goodness, we got to take a look at this right away.
That would be very deadly in the Western Conference for Carter Hart. And I think Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl would be very happy with that move if they can land a guy like Carter Hart.
Played out west during his junior career.
Yeah, that's a little hard.
He's an Alberta boy.
You've got Jack Campbell to 4 years left now, $5 million per year.
I'm just speculating.
Speculation for sure. That would be phenomenal too. But when you look at the numbers from his first 2 years to the last 2 years, just completely different. And a lot of that blame doesn't even fall on Carter Hart himself. The team was poorly managed. I've been saying this time and time again. I'm going down the John Tortorella rabbit hole here. He is toxic towards the dressing room. He takes the passion and the soul out of his players.
Hard for a young goalie.
Yeah, it's hard for a young goalie. It's hard for their young guys up top. You know, we talked a lot this year about their forward group who just haven't been producing as much as they can be. Again, the team just isn't really great right now. But if Carter Hart were to be moved, he becomes a very, very hot commodity in the fantasy hockey world. I would agree. Because even as is with the Philadelphia Flyers, he was a top 15 goaltender for fantasy points this past season. He was actually 13th best goaltender for fantasy points.
There you go.
That's ahead of guys like Fleury, Markstrom, Bobrovsky. You know, even on a bad team, he's putting up the points. He gets a few wins. He's getting the saves, a couple shutouts here and there. But Carter Hart, I think if he can move a change of scenery, it just opens the door wide open for him. And I think that would be best for both himself and the Philadelphia Flyers, who clearly just got a ton in return for a guy like Ivan Provorov. Imagine what they could get in return for Carter Hart, a stud goaltender in the league.
And I think that's just it, Steele. I feel like they're finally committing to a full-on break it all down, down to the studs. Get even worse, potentially. You know, it might get worse in Philly overall. And I know there was we love us some Noah Cates action. Owen Tippett was interesting. You know, there's some pieces there. Is Morgan Frost going to take a step? There are a lot of deep down the line positive things happening, but it's almost like they need to. Carter Hart's been there now. That was his 5th season. He has 2 good ones, 2 bad ones, and then last year bounces back. I think it's almost like a changing of the guard. You're going to get a good haul for Carter Hart. Load the board with picks and prospects, throw in there a couple of vets and see what you can get done. What we're going to get done right after the break is we're going to get to Mr. Gil Martin of Locked On Islanders. We're going to continue our breakdown of every single team in the NHL for you this offseason. Fantasy studs, what to look for, issues. Steele and I are taking a look at every single squad. And on tomorrow's episode, make sure you tune in. We're going to break down Game 2. Vegas flexing their muscle. What does Florida do in Game 3? We're going to tee up Game 3, big-time bets. And on Friday's episode, returning special guest, Mr. Josh Wegman of The Score. So make sure you're tuning in for that. And today's episode is brought to you by Bird Dogs. They make you look good. They make you feel good. And from the course to the clubhouse to the boardroom, they're those stretchy khaki shorts that are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh, giving you that sculpted look that makes you feel comfortable and confident. Steele and I have been loving this. I even gave a pair away to my father-in-law, Steele. He's rocking them every single day on the course, and he's feeling it. Make sure you check yourself out and get a new pair of these fixed, invented with knit fabric that looks just like khaki, but it stretches out to make sure that you're comfortable wherever you go. Hit up birddogs.com today and make sure you're entering the promo code LockedOnNHL for a free Yeti-style tumbler with each order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL for a free Yeti-style tumbler. You won't want to take the Bird Dogs off. We promise you, just like Steele and I. That's right. Head to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL today.
The NHL playoffs are here, and this one goes out to the goalies, the last line of defense, the ones who can save a game all by themselves. You know who else makes game-changing saves? Discover. They have savings accounts that earn 5 times the national savings average in interest. Could you imagine a goalie with 5 times the saves? Instant Hall of Famer. So start making some game-changing saves for yourself and check out the savings account at Discover. Discover Bank, member FDIC. See terms and learn more at discover.com/savings.
And thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Make sure you hit the subscribe, hit the follow button. We appreciate all the support you show us every single day. And here he is, the man himself, Gil Martin, host of the Locked On Islanders podcast. Gil, thank you so much for joining today. We have a ton of questions for you regarding the offseason, the draft coming up, even next season with a couple of stars and some contracts that happened over the last year. But how are you doing today? And how did you think the Islanders season went this past year?
I think it went about what I expected it to be. I figured they were going to be somewhere between 7th and 10th in the conference, either just make or just miss the playoffs. And if they won a round, that was going to be a bonus. So we didn't get the bonus, but we got the playoff berth. And, it didn't happen the way I necessarily expected it to, but it happened more or less what I expected to.
Yeah, I was there as well. I had them, before the season even began, Flip and I did our preseason records. I had them finishing in a wild card spot, first or second, and that ended up panning out properly to what I thought. And heading into the playoffs, I really thought that they had a really good chance at making a deep playoff run. I thought they easily could have won, or not easily, but they could have won that first round against the Hurricanes. A few unfortunate bounces didn't go their way. The scores were so close, a couple of overtime. So I thought they played really well. Unfortunate again. Before we talk or get to some of the higher end players, Barzal Horvat and Matthew Barzal, I want your opinion on some of the depth players and the veteran players the Islanders have. Again, Flip was just talking about some of the contracts on salary cap, and he'll get to that a little bit later in the episode. But, just looking at the roster right now, the Islanders have one of the oldest teams in the league, an average age of 29 years old. And, looking at Paul Mary, Josh Bailey, Zach Parise, Matt Martin, Cal Clutterbuck, and a few others, guys that they bring a certain, obviously the identity line. I love the identity line of the third line guys, but, putting up points of 25, 30 points in 82 games. What do you think the Islanders need to do this offseason, as well as look to the future, in order to gain a little bit more speed and a little bit more youth throughout their lineup?
That's a big question, Gil. Big question.
It's a good question, and my answer is probably not Lou Lamoriello's answer. So that's part of the problem. I've been saying on my show throughout the offseason, this team needs to get younger, faster, and add skill. But the cap being what it is and the way the contracts are laid out for this team, maybe they can make one move this offseason. Maybe 2 is pushing it. But, I think Josh Bailey is on his way out. I think that is more or less confirmed at Lou Lamoriello's press conference today. And whether he's traded or bought out, you get a couple of $1 million extra in cap space one way versus the other. But even with all that, if you're going to re-sign some of your own guys, there's not a lot of room to bring in the 2 biggest needs I think this team has. We could sit here and say ideally we need, but they need a puck-moving defenseman to help the transition game, and they need another goal scorer to be better than 22nd in the league on offense and 30th on the power play. I don't see how either of those necessarily happen with the cap constraints this team has right now.
That's just it, Gil. And the other thing, too, is looking at Cap Friendly. Shout out to our friends at Cap Friendly. he's kind of backed himself into a corner here with some of these contracts that they're going to have to handle. And you mentioned you see 1 or 2 moves, maybe 3 moves. They're just going to have to maybe ride or die and see what they're going to have to get done on the free agent market, some bargain bin type situations. I don't know what's going to happen here also. Semyon Varlamov, even though he is 35, he's going to command some good money as a backup that I don't see them being able to pay, especially with one of the best goalies on the planet, and Ilya Sorokin, going to command some good money after next season. You know they're going to need to throw him some cash. So I think they're going to need a goaltender as well. But my question here lies for you this way. I love Noah Dobson, and I think he's a really good piece to kind of, along with Romanov and some others, really good. We know this team hangs its hat on the defensive end.
Yeah.
What do you think that you're mentioning 1 or 2 moves? Bailey's on his way out. That puck-moving defenseman, is that the biggest need? Because I think they're going to have to address backup goaltending, the blue line, and they need some scoring. They need help everywhere.
Well, the backup goaltending may work out because there is a very good relationship between Varlamov and Ilya Sorokin. Varlamov has said at Getaway Day on May 1st that he really likes being with the Islanders, feels comfortable here, and it sounds like he is willing to take less to stay on Long Island. So if they can get him for about $2.5 million a year, he may be willing to do that, play 30 to 35 games. I think he's also being a fellow Russian goaltender,
right,
both on and off the ice. He's mentoring or has mentored Ilya Sorokin, and I think that relationship will encourage Varlamov to stay. That being said, if he doesn't, there is nobody in the system right now who is NHL ready to even be the backup. So, they would have to go out and spend probably $2 to $2.5 million on a backup goalie, and then you sort of wonder if it's not a quality backup.
Well, yeah.
You don't want Sorokin to play 65, 70 games and then have nothing left in the tank come playoff time. So I think they can work out the backup goalie. I think Varlamov is likely to stay, but again, I'll believe it when he signs on the dotted line. As far as the puck-moving defenseman, I think that should be priority 1.
Yeah,
only
too.
Because you mentioned this team hangs its hat on defense. One of the problems they've had over the course of the season is leaving their own zone and transitioning from defense to offense. You mentioned that you love Noah Dobson. I love him too, but in his own zone, I love him a lot less.
Good point.
He turns the puck over a little bit too much, has difficulty with that transition. Get him into center ice or into the offensive zone. He is a great young talent who could still get better. But in his own zone, he leaves a little bit to be desired. He even regressed, I think, this year.
True.
Getting a guy who would just doesn't have to be flashy, but a guy who could either pass or skate the puck out and get a clean transition from defense to offense. I think that has to be priority 1 because that kind of player you can get for less money than a goal scorer, and B, it makes your strength stronger and your weakness a little stronger without spending as much money, which the Islanders just can't afford to do. So I would make that priority 1, and then if you can get a goal scorer, I think you need to be a magician with a couple of trades and maybe LTIR or something that would have to come up. But maybe you save that till the trade deadline where you see where the team is. If they're competitive, if you need that goal scorer at the trade deadline, you get a rental or you get a player, and the cap hit is a lot less, and you could probably afford to do it that way. So ideally, working with all these limitations that the Islanders have, that's how I would prioritize things.
Sounds nice and easy, Gil. Nice and easy. No issues coming up. None I foresee.
Yeah, definitely a lot of work in the offseason for the front management. To your point there, Gil, if that's number 1 priority for the Islanders this offseason, how do they even go about trying to acquire one of those top free agents or, make a big blockbuster trade? I saw your episode the other day about how difficult it is to land a superstar free agent or even a big blockbuster trade to get them to come to the Long Island New York Islanders. How do they even do that in the front office?
Yeah, it's going to be tricky. The Islanders have had more success with the trade and sign
Yeah.
You look at Bo Horvat, they did that. JG Pajot, he was traded, signed. Kyle Palmieri, traded to the Islanders, came here, liked it, signed the extension. So I think that's the more likely way. If they're doing a free agent, I think it's a mid-tier kind of a guy.
Sure.
Either a veteran who can do it for a couple of seasons or a younger player who has the potential to get better but hasn't really blossomed yet. And you're talking about spending, more in the $3 to $4.5 million range than you are the $7 or $8 million range, because they just can't afford to do it. I wish they could, but unfortunately, the cap management has not been great here.
I call that the prototypical New York Islanders move. The mid-tier guys, band them all together. They got the goalie. Honestly, you know how much Steele and I have come on this show, and he is the best goalie on the planet at times, Sorokin. So I think if you have a goaltender that good, you're always in the game, and he proved it at points during this season. But Steele, we got a lot more questions for Gil. Why don't you take us to break, and we'll come back and grill him a little bit more.
Coming up next, we are going to talk about some high-valued fantasy hockey players and just superstars in the league. Matthew Barzal and Bo Horvat, some chemistry they can get going for next year. But this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. We have to pay the bills here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA and NHL playoffs, because right now, new customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's right, $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. It's the easiest and safest sports betting app on the market, and they have great promotions every single day. I especially love using the popular same-game parlay feature. Flip and I love our same-game parlays here. The hottest and spiciest parlays on the market. There's no better place to bet all the playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA.
What's up, everybody? David Harrison here of the Locked On Commanders podcast. When life gets crazy, and honestly, when doesn't it? Walmart helps you keep it all together now with a little extra help from Instacart. If you need your groceries now-ish, but your options for going to Walmart are later-ish or never-ish, you can get everything you need delivered through Instacart right to your door in as fast as an hour. Skip the shop and savor more of your crazy busy life with Walmart and Instacart. Visit instacart.com to get free delivery on your first 3 orders. Offer valid for a limited time. Minimum order $10. Additional terms apply.
The Vegas Golden Knights are closer to the promised land than ever before after taking a 2-0 series lead over the Florida Panthers in the Stanley Cup Final.
They have made it look easy in each of the first 2 games.
The Miami Heat delivered the Denver Nuggets their first home loss of the postseason over the weekend.
They followed their big 3 of Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, and I guess Duncan Robinson.
And the SEC has landed on a short-term scheduling solution for the 2024 football season when Oklahoma and Texas are set to join the conference.
Each team will only play 8 games.
For more on these stories, check out the latest from Locked On Golden Knights, Locked On Heat, and Locked On SEC. Then listen to Locked On's new series, Paving the Way. Each episode highlights a different voice from across the network, a Locked On host whose journey in the industry has helped to pave the way towards creating a more inclusive and diverse media landscape. That's Paving the Way, presented by State Farm, available on the Locked On Presents podcast feed.
And thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Make sure you tune in to Gil Martin, host of the Locked On Islanders well. Follow all his YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you listen to your podcast. Just make sure you follow the man. He knows all of his Islanders stuff and hockey, general news as well. Moving forward, though, Gil, the big question that I have for you, I got to talk about Matthew Barzal and Bo Horvat. Obviously, from the get-go, it was just difficult from Bo to get his foot under himself, trying to get some chemistry. I think that he got traded there. They played 6 games together. Matthew Barzal goes down to injury, so they couldn't really get the chemistry figured out. Obviously, they had to buckle down and finish those last 25 games, and every single point mattered for them. But coming back to the playoffs, it looked like they haven't even met before, to me anyways. They like first 3 games against the Hurricanes, they couldn't pass the puck. They couldn't break out properly together. And again, that's no fault to them. It's obviously takes some time to get some chemistry going. But I am really, really high on both Bo Horvat and Matthew Barzal. I have them in my fantasy teams and in a couple of different leagues. And, again, you were talking about this the other day. But for a guy who came into the Islanders, played 30 games, 16 points, okay season with the Islanders, what are your expectations for both Barzal and Horvat playing on a line together next year? Could they potentially both put up 70-plus points? Because if Barzal's healthy, I know he can put up 60 assists alone.
Or do you break them up, Gil? Do you break them up and split that up?
See, here's the key to that. Lines are made of 3 players. And I think Barzal and Horvat would be a good twosome. But Anders Lee, who was predominantly the third guy on that line, his style is too similar to Bo Horvat's to make that line work effectively.
Good point.
They are both the kind of guys who will get in front of the net, who will get the tips and the rebounds and are not necessarily very fast afoot. They were too similar to work well together. So to me, I would love to keep Barzal and Horvat on a line together if they could find a good third person to sort of finish off that line and make it work effectively, whether that could be Kyle Palmieri as a possibility, whether you look at Oliver Wahlstrom, if he's healthy again, as a possibility. There are a few players, if Pierre Engvall re-signs, which we don't know if he is, he would give a little speed. He's one of the few guys who could keep up with Matthew Barzal. So, there are candidates out there, but to me, I would keep them together if you could find a third piece that makes it all click. Anders Lee, not his fault, just too similar stylistically to Bo Horvat, and I don't think it worked well.
Yeah, very similar game. Similar styles of game. I saw your video the other day. I saw the video the other day. Very similar styles of game. They both love that bumper spot. They love sitting in front of the net, looking for deflections. I think as of right now, from looking at salary cap and just the lineup itself, I think if he does re-sign, Pierre Engvall is the way to go. Unless, again, they can sign a mid-tier free agent left winger during the offseason, again, which is already difficult in itself. But as it sits, I think Pierre Engvall just brings the speed that they could bring on that first line and keep up with Horvat and Barzal. But just talking about the two themselves, I think they could be one of the dangerous duos in the league, especially in the Eastern Conference in the Metro. I have a ton of faith in Bo Horvat to continue getting that offense. It takes time to learn an entirely new, style of play under Lambert as well. And, you talked about the differences between the Vancouver Canucks and New York Islanders. So just solely focusing on Bo Horvat himself now. Do you think he can sort of live up to what he did back in Vancouver last year? 55 games, he had 30 goals almost, 50 points. So do you think he can get that going back with the New York Islanders moving forward?
I think he can be very successful with the New York Islanders. I don't know if it'll quite be a point a game, though, just because of the way the Islanders system is geared. It's defense first. And, I mean, if you even look at Matthew Barzal's statistics, his best statistical season is still his rookie year when Doug Waite was the coach and they were playing a much more wide open system. And he was the second line center behind John Tavares. So I think, if Horvat was a 35 goal, 70 point kind of a guy in Vancouver, maybe he's a 25 to 30, 65 to point guy on Long Island in this system. Now, it could get better if you get that right third part of the line. And the first 6 games, the chemistry between Horvat and Barzal was looking pretty promising. So give them a whole offseason and a preseason and a training camp and a regular season. I think those guys can work a lot of good chemistry and develop into a dangerous duo. But I still don't necessarily think it'll be 35 goals for Bo Horvat in the Islanders system.
I think it just doesn't, as much as I really do love Bo Horvat's game and he does a little bit of everything well, you can run him out there in any format, 4-on-4, 5-on-5, penalty kill, power play, the last few minutes of the game, he is your guy to be out there. Is that going to translate into the same overall fantasy success and point production next season? I don't think so, just because he's also going to have to take on even more responsibility, in my opinion, than he did in Vancouver. They're going to count on him to win even more so in Long Island. So big eyes on him. My eyes, and my final question for you, Gil, because a lot of our listeners, we're trying to always get a leg up on some young pieces. You mentioned Oliver Wahlstrom. I know they traded out. What is it? They trade out. Is it Ratu in that deal? Was that? So they, what kind of prospects, if any? I know the cupboard is a little bit thin. Even if you have one name to make an impact on the NHL level, even if it's a year down the road, is there any prospects or young players we should have our eyes on in the Islanders system?
2 names I'm going to give you. The first one is maybe the only guy who might be able to contribute something this year if he makes the team, and that's Ruslan Ishkakov. Okay. He is I think he was on the second line at Bridgeport. The issue with Ishkakov is his size. He's a small player. He's got skill. The Islanders need skill. The thing is that Lou Lamoriello and Lane Lambert traditionally are reluctant to give a lot of responsibility to young players. Yeah, right. Wahlstrom has seen that as an issue. We saw Dobson being brought along slowly. Ratu was traded before he could really, become something. If they're willing to give Ishkakov a chance, he could give them some more skill, some good passing. He may be a year away, but I think he has the best chance. And then the other player would be William Dufour, who is probably another year away. He was a rookie last year at Bridgeport. I think that he will, take a full season in the AHL and then probably be ready for 2024, 2025, where in training camp he'll have a good shot at making the team.
Keepers Dynasty, folks, keep your ears peeled. Thank you for your answers, Gil. Appreciate it. Steele, you got a last one for Gil?
No, that covers everything. He answered all the questions I had and everything I had kind of in my brain for next fantasy season as well. Bull Horvat, a guy I'm
It's going to be tough for the Islanders is what I'm taking away from it.
It will be tough, but there are some key guys. Obviously, Elias Sorokin, Noah Dobson, Barzal, and Horvat, Anders Lee. There's a few guys up there that bring the fantasy value to a lot of our teams. But Gil, thank you so much for breaking down some of the offseason and future things that are happening in the Islanders organization. Make sure you're tuning in to Locked On Islanders on your favorite podcast platform and on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe and follow Gil Martin on all of his socials. Make sure you follow the Fantasy Hockey Podcast as well. Monday through Friday, 7 o'clock in the morning Eastern time is when you can find our episodes. Again, thank you so much for tuning in for today. Have a great day. Good luck with all your bets out there if you have any. And we shall see you back here again tomorrow.
Peace.
The Vegas Golden Knights are closer to the promised land than ever before after taking a 2-0 series lead over the Florida Panthers in the Stanley Cup Final.
They have made it look easy in each of the first 2 games.
The Miami Heat delivered the Denver Nuggets their first home loss of the postseason over the weekend.
They followed their big 3 of Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, and I guess Duncan Robinson.
And the SEC has landed on a short-term scheduling solution for the 2024 football season when Oklahoma and Texas are set to join the conference.
Each team will only play 8 games.
For more on these stories, check out the latest from Locked On Golden Knights, Locked On Heat, and Locked On SEC. Then listen to Locked On's new series, Paving the Way. Each episode highlights a different voice from across the network, a Locked On host whose journey in the industry has helped to pave the way towards creating a more inclusive and diverse media landscape. That's Paving the Way, presented by State Farm, available on the Locked On Presents podcast feed.
Hey, Prime members, you can listen to this Locked On podcast ad-free on Amazon Music. Download the Amazon Music app today.